Empowered people make informed decisions that lead to living a life without regret. This is Sara Khaki and Shawna Woods from Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and this is the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast.
Welcome to the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. I'm attorney Sara Khaki with Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and I'm joined by our managing partner, Shawna Woods. I'm really excited about today's episode because I am a challenger at heart, and I love to challenge the status quo stereotype belief system we have about arranged marriages. And today we're going to talk about arranged marriages. And Shawna, you are notoriously known as a statistician of our podcast. I have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts, and I'm just going to throw them out there. And I know you'll catch me when I fall with all of those opinions with your numbers. I don't know what your numbers are, but I know you have numbers on arranged marriage.
I do. I have them, and it's turned over on the sheet right now, so you can't see it.
I can't even see them. So let's do a lawyer thing first.
Okay.
What do you think? What do you define arranged marriage as?
Well, that's a really good question, because that is part of the question I think that we have to ask is, what is an arranged versus a forced marriage?
Yes.
Right. So if I'm looking just as arranged marriage, I mean, my understanding is probably a lot smaller than maybe yours or some other people who've lived in other countries and traveled more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think of arranged marriages, the families have gotten together and said, hey, we would like to join your family to our family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this son of mine and that daughter of yours would get along really well.
Yep.
And I think that's what an arranged marriage is.
So do you, I know that growing up, probably somewhere in high school or college, I remember when you studied arranged marriages in different societies, they would define it in the textbook or from the professor's mouth, whether I was taking like a sociology class, as they had never met each other prior to getting married. And I think that's how in Hollywood, they depict it.
Yes.
The girl and the boy had never met each other. So maybe there's a range of arranged marriages, but I think for the sake of this conversation, I'm in line with you. Arranged marriage is families came together and set this up. I think in some families, there's still a courtship that happens, a period of them getting to know each other, deciding if they want to go through with it, and perhaps a longer engagement. And I think you have that all the way to the point of, I'm sure there's still societies and cultures where they never get to see each other. They never get to know each other before they are actually walking down the aisle. Kind of, you think of like Dark Ages, royal families, combining families kind of thing, right? Like they ship in the girl from Scotland, Mary of Scots, and then here comes Francis the Prince, and first time they ever meet each other is down the aisle, that sort of thing.
That sort of thing.
I'm sure that's still happening. My thought on this, on a high level, is this. There is a high universal divorce rate across the world. It's not even just in America. I just got back from Egypt and was speaking to a lot of family members, and they were telling me, my husband's family's Egyptian, how predominant divorce has become in Egypt. They were just going through a small sample size of their own family members and friends, and we're talking people being on their third, fourth marriages. We had family members that said that they're the only one left in their entire group of college friends that had not been divorced at this point. Same is true in Iran. Divorce has gone up. That's my country of birth. We have a lot of Indian clients who are telling us that divorce is such a predominant thing. So divorce rate's gone up. And I don't think the number of families that are practicing the old school arranged marriage model has gone up. So I think there's a lot of marriages that are happening from two people coming together and making that decision that are failing. So why aren't we open to the idea of hopefully two families that have your best interest in mind? That might not always be the case, who have watched you grow up, who have an idea of what marriage is because perhaps your parents are still married or the other side's parents are still married, and they have more life experience, more cultural experience, more historical experience, a broader perspective. They're not in there with their, emotions and hormones running high. They're there looking objectively, factually, and saying, okay, what are the chances of this making it? in looking at those factors and coming to a decision of, okay, this is a good match. Because at the end of the day, your partner, your life partner is the most important decision you're going to make in your life. And it has to be more than, wow, I'm really attracted to this person. You need all the data you can get. So what does the data tell us? Are arranged marriages more successful than the more common marriages that we're used to?
It depends.
Oh, man. Don't lawyer me, Shawna.
Okay, well, I do have the statistics for you, but I think that whenever we use statistics, we also have to break down exactly what do these statistics actually mean.
Right.
Right. And this may surprise you, Sarah. I'm not opposed at all to arranged marriages. I think they can be very successful. I think that there is something to be said about choosing who you love,
Right.
rather than the quote unquote, oh, I fell in love.
Right.
So I think to start there, and just to share a very minor experience that I have, is the very first lawyer that I worked for in law school ended up having his wife, that was an arranged marriage. And he was never into it. He was never into the idea of arranged marriage. He was very Americanized. And though his family and her family, they set them up, match made in heaven.
Wow.
Absolutely wonderful. They're still married. They have 3 beautiful children, absolutely amazing family. And so that was my personal experience in seeing an arranged marriage. So statistically, I was actually a little surprised that worldwide, over 50% of marriages are arranged.
Really?
Worldwide, yeah.
Over 50%.
Over 50%.
I wonder countries like India, Indonesia,
Exactly.
some of those, how they're skewing because they have high population and they have still the more traditional cultures of arranged marriages. So they're probably definitely impacting that percentage.
India, Japan, and China.
Okay.
So those are the ones where we're seeing the highest. And of course, that makes sense with their population the way it is. But you also kind of makes sense because it's more of a homogeneous country rather than a very diverse country like the United States. That's not to say there aren't arranged marriages here. There are. We can get into it. I think it may be a little different and skewed in the United States. But what the statistics are showing, and it's very, again, we have to look at what the statistics mean. 4% worldwide divorce rate on arranged marriages.
Wow.
4% compared to the 40 to 50% on quote unquote love matches.
And as much as I'm sitting here preaching arranged marriages,
you weren't expecting that.
I wasn't expecting that. But I also question this. I mean, this is like, my little bit of my sociology hat coming on. How much of that percentage of divorce being so low is due to the fact that the freedom level in those countries, resources to get divorced, the freedom to speak up and get divorced might be lower, or the legal system might have more barriers to divorce, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I said you really have to kind of question, what do these statistics mean? A lot of times when you come from countries with arranged marriages, divorce is such a stigma.
Right.
It's a stigma not only for the people who go through the divorce, but also for the families. So it's as if you're shaming your family if you decide that this marriage is no longer working.
It's a reflection on the whole family because the whole family made that decision.
Right. And so I do think that plays into it. I also do want to mention, because I do think it's an important statistic, that even here in the United States, when we're talking about arranged versus forced, because people often misconstrue the two. Since the year 2000, Sarah, do you have any idea how many children in the United States were married by permission of their parents?
No.
Over 300,000 in the United States.
Wow.
So I think when we're talking about these statistics, it kind of begs the question, like we were saying, but why are they staying married?
Mm-hmm.
And what are we defining as a successful marriage?
Yeah, is it just the fact that it's made it past 10 years, or has somebody asked them if they're still happy? It's really fascinating. I think if you were to take a look at the statistics of two people, all else being equal, making a decision on their own, courting each other on their own, or having families who's looking out for their best interest and looking at almost like a resume type match, which one has a higher chance? I do really believe, though, that there are, Middle Eastern countries. In Egypt, this is common. Iran, this is also common. They have a good happy medium, which is the families do come together and they sort of set up a courtship period, and then it's up to the kids, right? So you kind of eliminate a lot of noise. You eliminate a lot of chances of going down the wrong path. And the families look at okay, families have similar values to us. Upbringing is the same. Perhaps religious things are similar. And if the family's like really aware, they probably would hope and ask for, what are the dreams for the future and that sort of thing. And then based on that information, and they set up this courtship, and in that courtship, this young couple get to make a decision on their own. I think that's a happy medium. And I think that might be the closest we get to making decisions with as much data as you possibly can.
Well, I know this sounds kind of silly, maybe trite, but quite frankly, wouldn't you rather your family do it than in harmony?
It's so funny you say that, because I was thinking to myself, basically that's what these dating websites have done. They've taken out that family portion, but you put in like your interests, you put in like your career,
your passions, your wants, your desire.
Right, and then you go filter through them. There's actually websites for families to use that. There are. Yes, there are. I know there's Indian websites where families can go on these sites, and it's just for in that ethnic group, and parents go on there and they find matches for their children.
That's fascinating.
I know.
Jokingly, our Ashley here and another one of my friends have jokingly said they were taking over my dating life and deciding for me.
Yes.
Yeah. And it does make sense sometimes, because your friends, your family, they know you very well.
And they see your blind spot.
They see your blind spots. They see, okay, this is maybe the type of person they've gone for in the past. Let's switch that up a little bit. Or they really do have your best interest at heart for the most part. We're not talking about the outliers, but I love that compromise. And it's like my friend Sam in New Mexico and his wife, that was the compromise.
Right.
All right, we're just going to introduce the two of you who we think are good for each other. And I think it's been at least 25 years later.
I mean, I have many stories like this in my family from older generations where it was all arranged. And for instance, my aunt, who's passed away now, she went into an arranged marriage at the age of 18, adored her husband. Like when he passed, it was heartbreaking. They were together for over 50 years, adored him.
How did you meet your husband?
Hisham? Yeah. It was just a typical college meetup. We had a mutual friend from high school that introduced us in our first year of college.
I do think it's nicer when you meet organically rather than on these apps or something of that kind. And I think it's nice that you have friends who introduce you
Yeah, I think it's like the arranged marriage model of like, my aunt that's old enough to be my grandmother. It's evolved, right? At that point, I think it really was truly arranged. It was never forced. They might have met a couple of times before the engagement, but you very much, the belief system of your own identity being separate from your family has evolved, right? The sense of autonomy and independence. It used to be more of a Western idea, but it really has seeped into the Eastern cultures as well now. And you see that 100% when you go travel to the East. They are now also having a stronger stance for their independence or personal autonomy versus everything being community-based. But I think it has evolved where now you still make the decision, but we have a community that is involved in the decision-making. You have elders of the family that sort of have to bless it. It's not every Middle Eastern family or every Eastern family, but I think it's still predominant, sort of how it's acceptable. in our family, in our culture, Iranian culture, and Hashem and I abided by this, even though we grew up in much more modern families. The groom's family, or the parents are supposed to come over to the future bride's family's house and ask for her hand in marriage. So this idea of him proposing to you it's very Western. It's very Western. And we did a bit of a mix of that, because everything Hashem and I have ever done has been, okay, we've grown up in Europe and America, but our heritage is the Middle East. So we try to honor that. So even though Hashem proposed to me, before he did so, he brought his parents over to my house and had his dad ask my dad for, could we take in Sara as our daughter, into our family. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It kind of shows that we understand that your daughter is going to be our daughter, and we're going to take care of her as our daughter. And we look you in the eye and we make this commitment that we're going to take care of your child.
That I find it fascinating, and I find it beautiful. It's an incredible thing. The Western version is the man asks your father,
yes,
permission. Going back to this kind of does inform me a little bit more. We've done some divorces that have been arranged marriages, right, and all of the family involved in the divorce.
Oh, yes.
Very much devolved. And this makes complete sense, because they really are separating their family rather than, oh, that was just my daughter-in-law who I never really liked anyway.
Well, Shawna, you have to also remember that in our culture, the father and the mother of the groom made a promise to take care of the daughter of the bride's family. And this divorce means that they're breaking that promise, or whatever happened in the marriage means
the promise was broken.
The promise was broken. This might not be contractually so, this might not be so much verbally so, but it's a spiritual responsibility. It's a very cultural responsibility we feel towards bringing, when a marriage comes together, what is the rest of the family's responsibility to this new family member?
That is actually very fascinating, because I do have the last arranged marriage that we did, or I was personally involved in as a divorce. The marriage was very short. Mm-hmm. It was maybe a year. And they had not lived together for most of that year. But there was so much discussion over making sure that the woman was able to continue in school, and that she had a vehicle to get her where she needed to go. And his family, they were arguing vehemently that his family needed to provide that for her. Right. Which makes sense with what you're saying. The promise was, in our Western culture in divorce, we're looking at it as like, you were married a year. What do you want?
Right.
But it's such a different concept.
Well, you're also seeing, as inflation goes up and, more inequalities happening, more vastly in Eastern countries. I mean, I know we're seeing a lot of that in America too, but quite honestly, nothing compared to what they're seeing in some of the more developing world. And you are seeing less marriages. And one of the reasons they'll tell you is because when a man brings a bride home, he better have a home to bring her to. That is becoming an increasing expectation of the bride's family, that do you have a home for my daughter? Do you have, if we're in the middle of Cairo, do you have an apartment for her? If you're somewhere in more rural areas, do you have a home? And that can be very much part of what the father of the groom has to financially plan for when he thinks about the marriage of his son. Is, am I going to be able to afford helping him out to buy a home for his future wife? And I put that in American perspective, right? Like you said, what are we talking about? You've only been married for 1 year. There should be no assets. There is no alimony. There is
hopefully no children.
Right. And then, but what do we talk about when we have arranged marriages? Dowry. Don't we usually have a conversation of dowry?
Absolutely. And I was just sharing that with our newest associate today, about when you're dealing with people who have arranged marriages or coming from a different culture, specifically from India.
Right.
We see a lot of dowry and jewelry exchanges, and it's very important.
Right.
And meeting people, again, we've talked about this before, meeting people where they are, because, in my mind, the first time I heard about, exchanging this jewelry, I was like, I don't know, keep what you want. What are you talking about? But it's very important because, again, it's an exchange.
Well,
of wealth.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think if you put an American lens on it and a lawyer's lens on it, you're going to say it was a gift of the marriage. It's not up for a conversation in this divorce. But if you put it in a cultural relative perspective, this was probably ancestral family heirlooms that was given to the bride. This is probably like a grandmother's great grandmother's gold that she had saved, and it's part of their family heirlooms that was given to the bride. So it has a lot more meaning than, I went to Shane Company and bought you a necklace for your wedding.
I went to the jewelry store and bought you some pearls.
Right.
You're right. You do learn those things as you practice. And I do think that the courts, well, first of all, they really can't do much about it. But it's about settlement, right?
Right.
It's about compromise and getting to that place where you could say, I understand this is the most important to you, rather than I could get you XYZ PDQ, but this is what your focus be. I'd be very curious to see if arranged marriages, because you mentioned the economy, and quite frankly, I think it's going to be harder and harder for everyone to start owning, homes and places to live. So do you think arranged marriages will go down?
I think arranged marriages are going down overall because the Western idea of individualism is more predominant. Is more prevalent, and it has been. And I think Instagram, Facebook, social media definitely reinforces it. So I think we have more of a cultural sweep happening, right? And this can be for another conversation, but it lends itself into also why are we culturally seeing more narcissism, right? But I think overall, that was always a big cultural divide between the West and the East. The West is a lot more individualistic philosophy, and the East is a lot more community-based, family-based, and group philosophy. But I do think that the East is catching up with the West on more individualistic view. So arranged marriage, I think at its core, is not individualistic. It's very much of understanding that marriage is not just about I fell in love with someone. Marriage has implications on your family, has implications on your community, has implications on generations to come, and ancestry and legacy. It's one of the reasons Mulan is one of my favorite movies of all time. But so I think as we are adopting more Western notions there, arranged marriages will go down. We've already seen them change. There's very few societies that still exercise forced arranged marriage or completely blind arranged marriages, right? Where you have never seen this person before. It's becoming more and more watered down of setting up a courtship.
So in your experience with arranged marriages in the different cultures, because when I think about arranged marriages in the United States, my mind goes immediately to polygamous sects out in the middle of nowhere, Utah, with forcing 12, 14-year-old girls to marry, 50, 60-year-old men, right? That's where mine goes. Do you see that in, places that you've been and places that you've experienced that have arranged marriages? Are they dealing with situations where particularly the female is so much younger than the male?
Yes. So there is a dark side to this, for sure. This is not necessarily Islamic law, but there are Islamic countries that interpret the Quran however they want to interpret it.
Just like the polygamists in Utah.
Exactly. So it's just like, you see sects that interpret the Bible however they want to their own liking. You do have some fringe groups, and especially in villages and uneducated areas and in Iran, and I can't speak for other parts of the Islamic world, but I know it happens, where yes, the father has a right to give away the daughter at the age of 9. Yes. And at the age of 9, a girl can be married off. And they will claim Islamic law, which I don't believe that's true, and wed off a young girl. And it could be, and if you want to look at it from anthropological reason, you could say, well, maybe it's because the father couldn't afford to hold on to the girl. She was finding a home for her. So many different reasons. And it could also be, like you said, not the first marriage, right? Could be the second. This could be the second or the third wife. So there's definitely a dark side to this as well.
Oh, I agree. But I mean, not to say there's not a dark side to most things.
Right.
Right. And I think that we do explore them. And I don't want to focus necessarily on that dark side, but I was curious if that was still prevalent as well.
Yes.
Because I do think that plays into the less than 4% divorce rate. When you have a 5th grade education, that's kind of hard to figure out if you can get divorced or not. That being said, the ones I've seen are successful. The ones you've seen.
I mean, the ones I've seen in my family, when I say my family, I'm talking about older than my parents' generation.
Yeah.
And the ones I've heard about from that generation, all very successful, very happy. Actually, I believe my grandparents were arranged as well.
Your parents weren't?
My parents weren't. My dad chased my mom for 2 years straight.
I love that factoid.
You love it about my mom.
I do. Your mom's a hottie.
My mom got proposed twice by him.
Love it.
Yeah, that's we could do a whole podcast episode on what that man went through to get her to marry him.
I want to have drinks with your mom.
She can be a good time. But no, my parents weren't. Most of my aunts and uncles weren't. But it was that it still was very much a family conversation of mom, dad. Here's who I want to marry. Can you guys please talk to her parents? That definitely was the case. It wasn't this, I'm going to sweep you off your feet in the middle of Tiffany's and get down on one knee and propose with the ring, which that sounds fabulous as well. But that is not, they did the traditional way, my parents' generation, aunts, uncles, all of them, where family showed up at the doorsteps and asked the other family for the hand in marriage for their daughter.
I'm sorry. I'm just laughing because when my mom got married for the second, well, this would be the third time because she married my dad twice. The way she told me was, guess what my last name is? I'm just thinking of the difference in the family structure.
Yes. I think that another part to this could be, that would be interesting for a future topic, is the difference in the socioeconomics, how that plays into the arranged marriage.
Yeah.
Right? Because it makes more sense if the lower socioeconomic standing, that arranged marriage would be an easier one to go into versus, oh man, for me, I have to go get a house for you. I have to go this for you versus arranged marriage allows families to talk to each other and bypass the expenses of courtship, the expenses of having to spend money to go figure it out.
This has been very informative.
Thank you, Shawna.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. If you'd like to learn more, go to atlantadivorcelawgroup.com/resources.